Kashmir is one of those issues that someone you meet will probably have an opinion on, inside or outside of India. The issue, with all its intricacies, has been debated and disputed since independence 70 years ago. You'll find countless politicians and intellectuals debating, more likely screaming, with one another in TV studios, where mostly the journalists also get into the action rather than doing their job in mediating. Two things are obviously clear about the situation in Kashmir. The issue has a variety of facets that get lost in our biases, and the second is that we tend to portray Kashmir as just one of those picturesque territories, rather than perceiving it through the vantage point of Kashmiris themselves. In that process, we lose out on the humanistic approach to the people of Kashmir and their beauty, not just the territory. Noting that, my guest this week on Swadeshi Videshi is Sehar Dedmari, who graduated from NYU in May and ended up going to Kashmir for a few months and working there with a few nonprofits. Now, Sehar's family are immigrants from Kashmir. Her grandparents still live in Srinagar today, and during her time there, she started blogging, and we hope today that we can skip out the politics and the screaming at each other and talk about her experience. Sehar, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here.
So, just a note to our listeners, you can follow along, and we're going to be referring to Sehar's blog, and you can read her blog on Kashmir2017blog.wordpress.com. So, Sehar, I wanted to kind of start off and ask, what made you go to Kashmir?
So, my parents, like you said, were born and raised in Kashmir. A lot of my family is still there, and as I was growing up as a child of immigrants in the U.S., I was honestly pretty shielded from the Kashmiri conflict for a large part of my life. I did have this vague understanding that there was some political tension, but I really had no idea of the scope of things that were going on. And as I got older, I became more educated about this place I came from. A lot of credit to my dad, who is such a giant history book of information, and he really made an effort to educate me and my sister as we grew up. And so when I graduated college last year, May of 2017, I had that typical kind of post-college existential crisis when, you don't have to deal with classes and tests and these set schedules every single day. And I really started thinking about what was I supposed to do with my life now on a day-to-day basis, and who am I outside these confinements of education, and what do I kind of owe this world, and how can I use the world around me to I am and my personality outside of education. So I decided to take a few gap years after I graduated, and I knew I wanted to do some kind of work that reconnected me to my roots. And so I ended up getting in touch with a few nonprofits in Kashmir, the Guru Charitable Foundation and Chinar International. And mostly what I focused on there was working on this youth life support program where we taught a bunch of Kashmiri youth in the area trauma first aid and CPR. And I was able to also just explore a lot of different great things that these nonprofits are doing for the people of Kashmir.
The names that you took of the nonprofit was Chinar International.
Yes.
I've heard of the Chinar, the Chinar, the significance of that tree. In my knowledge, it's been something that's synonymous with Kashmir.
The Chinar tree, it is a tree that is native to the Kashmir Valley area, and it, they're the types of trees that are always very large and have the huge, spreading top, and it's very synonymous with Kashmiri seasons that you see these very, specific pointy chinar leaves, in the fall start to turn different colors and fall down and rain all over the floor. And in the winter, you see these heavy branches filled with snow. And because they are such a popular tree in the Kashmiri area, it is kind of a symbol of Kashmir. The chinar leaf is, for the specific organization, Chinar International, they, use the, very emblematic Kashmiri tree leaf as a symbol that we're helping all the people of Kashmir and the whole territory which is populated by this chinar tree.
Hmm. The reason I ask is I'm a practicing Hindu, and when I visited Srinagar at one point, there was actually a temple in Kashmir
Hmm.
called the Kir Bhavani, and Hindus, revere the chinar tree. And there, I also saw not in the same location, but obviously a masjid there, and
Yeah.
they also had the chinar tree, like strategically placed within the masjid, and I just thought that was really interesting. Hindus and Muslims are, revering and praying to this tree.
But that is really nice. I mean, considering that it is
Quite
a
symbolic.
tree that is, yeah, very symbolic of the area, then why not have it represented in every major religious place that.
It's been 5 minutes, and your dad has actually come up a lot, and so kind of I wanted to ask, what's your dad's perspective, not on Kashmir, but like what brought him to the States and
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because my dad actually wasn't with me and my mother when we were in Kashmir for those 6 weeks, except for I think the final week and a half or
Oh,
something.
okay.
So it's really funny that he ended up being very prominent in my blog, despite the fact that he wasn't there for most of the trip, because again, most of the knowledge that I have about Kashmir comes from him, and it's, I mean, very fair to say that he is the person in my life that is the most passionate about Kashmir, the politics, talk, as well as the very emotional things and talking about the landmarks of Kashmir and the history of it in, a very cultural sense. And
Hmm.
he, I guess, when he was living in Kashmir, he did see most of the, political strife that was going on as a
Hmm.
young person. So he was in those groups of people that spoke up about the injustices and tried to engage in peaceful protests and stuff. And he does have some really jarring stories of, when he gets caught in crossfire, he's running from police and stuff. But
Hmm.
most of his life, I mean, and to this day, he's always just been very family oriented at the heart of it, which is something very common in all, I think, South Asian, East Asian cultures. I'm sure you can relate as well that, family is very much at the core of what we believe in. And what my dad did, in immigrating to America was, for the good of the family. He
Right.
didn't want to be in this area of Kashmir, even though it is his home and he feels, so attached to it, if it was an unsafe place to raise his kids and have a family. So
Hmm.
that was kind of what drove him to come here. And he has carried on that passion of, being so close to Kashmir in trying to educate his children about it.
Hmm.
And, I'm not ashamed to admit that when I was younger, of course, I kind of brushed it off. I didn't really want to sit and listen to these history lessons and things like that. But once I got older and, started reaching out myself to him and asking him, what was it like during these revolts, or, how were the, cold, harsh winters? How was the education there?
Hmm.
Things like that. I, got closer to my dad and also realized, how deeply his connection is to Kashmir through his whole life, all these, life changing experiences that he had while he was there. And I mean, we do always joke that once my sister and I are graduated and settled and everything, he's just going to buy his own little hut in some field in Kashmir and he's just going to live there and he's going to like play cricket all the time and raise some goats or something.
The blogs, you have this post about just walking with your dad, and you go to the Gulshan bookstore, which we'll get to, but then walks into a random bookstore, and he knows people there, and so it's a very familiar setting for him, I assume.
Yeah, it was a really cute few hours that I spent with him. One day, my mom was running errands. I didn't have work. There was nothing to do. It was just my dad and I sitting. So he said, "Come with me, and I'll show you around the downtown area of Kashmir." And
Yeah.
it was cool. We did start at Gulshan Bookstore, which is a very famous bookstore in Kashmir, and we ended up walking around the whole downtown Srinagar area, and
Hmm.
he showed me, this corner stop that he and his friends, when they were younger, would always go and, buy their daily pack of cigarettes from, and, uh, talk about the, whatever chit chat they had to talk about at that time.
Hmm.
And, the shop owner there recognized him and, updated him about all his friends' lives and things like that. And then, we walked further, and there were some clothing stores and like some stores that sold toiletries and things like that he went in. And one of the shop owners was actually the son of the man that, used to sell my dad like his undershirts and his pants and stuff like that. And he would, recognize my dad, and they would have a conversation. And of course, he'd walk in and people would be like, "Oh, come stay, have a cup of tea and everything." And he would say, "No, I'm just taking my daughter around. I'm showing her all these places I used to go." And it was very sweet to see that the community is still so connected, even after so many years of, people moving to different countries, and through generations, people still remember a familiar face.
Yeah, you're all over the world, and come back and you can catch up.
Yeah, it's like nothing ever changed.
I think a lot of things changed. One of the things that you kind of hit on and is kind of prominent as well is the Dal Lake, right? And you have a blog titled Sadness Plus Water. So why sadness? Because, as an outsider, as a tourist especially, I perceive Dal Lake to be absolutely beautiful. Where do you see the sadness?
Well, I've always been someone who finds just the presence of water very comforting. I've grown up in Los Angeles here on the West Coast, so I've always had this ocean presence in my life. And I know Dal Lake is very famous in Kashmir, and I've seen it through the years, and when I go and visit every 4 to 5 years since my childhood. And one of the first things I noticed when I got there in this particular trip was just how polluted the lake had become. And of course, because I was making this trip with the intention of kind of really connecting to Kashmir and understanding its history, seeing, the deteriorated state that this lake had gone into as a result of, tourism and, war that's happening, and then just general natural factors that we can't control. It really honestly made me kind of sad, having your first impact, I guess, of walking into Kashmir, and you're full of all this hope and inspiration and everything. And then you see kind of the dilapidated state that things are in. It does make you a little bit sad. And I mean, luckily I was able to turn that sadness into something more profound and more productive, and, not just sit and sulk at it, but still try to see the beauty that is underneath all the, algae overpopulation and, dying industry of the floating markets and things like that. But
is it dying though? Is it it's something that is obviously seen in commercials, and we fantasize over it. So like, is it dying, or is there still a flourishing market? And one other thing is even though the actual lake is getting polluted, is the livelihood of those people still intact in terms of like, are they still able to provide for their family? Are they still able to sell whatever their business is? Because your blog posts, I mean, these are beautiful. Like these people, coming up in boats and selling you jewelry and watches. It just sounds like everyone how they describe Kashmir to be.
I know it does sound pretty happy-go-lucky. I feel bad using the word dying industry, because it obviously is still there, and these people do have to make a livelihood. They are actively selling, but it is, of course, like a market mainly targeted towards tourists. Their main stream of revenue is from tourists who go on these boat rides and who they do sell these things to, which, obviously is usually my family and I, because we want to go and we want to have these experiences.
But I'm on the same boat as you, don't worry.
Yeah, of course, right? So, I mean, that is their mainstream of getting money. And I do like to think that as a result of factors of, the lake's condition deteriorating, and also the unstable political situation, the tourism industry is kind of up and down. So that can't be the most stable thing in the world for those people, but you do have to admire their spirit. They are always, very persistent and very happy to help out any customers that come their way. And I remember, I think I put this in the blog. I actually don't remember if I got a picture of it or not, that when we would, ride by, there would be shop owners like chatting and having their chai together, and they would make chai for each other. And because the markets are floating on the water, they would like put the cup of chai in a little like metal plate, and they would float it across the water to each other in each other's shops. And then they would, have their chai distributed that way, and then they would sit and they would talk about the day and the family and everything like that, and it was really sweet. So obviously, lifestyle isn't changing too much, but it was a nice thing to see. As long as this lake is here, these people do have some sort of yeah, and life to live. And it's nice. I mean, we're going to still continue to go there every time we go to Kashmir and buy these special handicrafts and stuff.
So, changing tracks a little bit, your dad is very omnipresent in your blog. Someone who I tried to find but only found like one picture of is your mom. So, did your mom also grow up in Kashmir, or what's her story?
Yeah, she did. I feel so bad. She was with me the whole time, which is, I think, less of a reason of me to include her all the time, because I felt like I, had my daily dose of her every day.
Yeah.
She, also was born and raised in Kashmir. She's 8 years younger than my dad, so she grew up in, slightly different conditions than my dad did. Not too much, but a little different. And she was in a family of all girls, and my dad had, one other brother and a couple sisters. So it was definitely a different upbringing in that, of course, there's differences with how parents raise you too, and how my dad's parents raised him were different than how my mom's parents raised her. So she wasn't as involved in the big political things that were happening in Kashmir, but she definitely still carries those values of being family-centered and caring for the people around you and the culture around you. And she's definitely been someone who taught me about kindness. And
is she from the Srinagar area as well, or?
Yeah, she's from Srinagar as well. Okay, she and my dad, they actually are from like neighboring neighborhoods.
Okay.
in Srinagar.
Oh, yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I think the reason that my mom and dad connect so well is because they both have that great foundation of the importance of community, especially the Kashmiri community, and the importance of helping out your fellow people whenever you're able to. Yeah. And she's really passed that down in me to, look out for others and always treat people with kindness. And I've recently been, writing all these essays for medical schools and personal statements and reflecting a lot on my own character. And I'm really starting to derive a lot of my specific character traits from both my parents and also from like the Kashmiri people in general. This fighting spirit that I have in me is definitely something that's, a Kashmiri quality that people have.
So now one quick question is, being an Indian American as well, for me, I, tried to connect with the Indian community that was in America and try to relate to them as much as I could. Your parents obviously come from a Kashmiri background, and your dad is obviously very very pro Kashmiri independence. But in America, at least, do you feel like you have a community of Indian Americans, or not just your parents as well, or do they stick with just the Kashmiris? I'm really curious about that.
It's funny you say that, because for a large period of, I think, when my parents immigrated to America, it was very much just the Kashmiri community that they were interacting with. Because a lot of the young people in the Kashmiri area did end up immigrating and coming to America. There's still a large amount of them that remain in Kashmir, but a lot of us came and moved to Los Angeles, actually, and there's a big community of us here.
Why
we
LA?
Do have... that's a great question. We always joke that it's probably because of the weather. Like, the weather is so nice that if you had to pick somewhere, moving from Kashmir to here.
Isn't it humid in LA?
It's not. I mean, don't mean to brag or anything, but it's pretty much just like 70 degrees Fahrenheit and like sunny and mild every day, except for a few like odd days out. So it is. That's what my mom always jokes, that she's like, you think after living in this scorching heat and the like blistering snow, we're gonna pick anywhere other than like nice and mild LA? Yeah. But I mean, definitely it's just a big metropolitan city where there's a lot of career opportunities, and at the time that they moved here, it was a place where there was lots of real estate available, and I'm sure there were a lot of factors that contributed to it. But there are specific cities all over the country that there are large populations of Kashmiris, for those reasons, that, it's a nice temperate area. There's, job availability, things like that.
Yeah, I bothered you too, but you were saying that in the onset you really interacted with just the Kashmiri community, but has that changed a little bit?
Yeah, so it has definitely expanded over the years. The first, beginning of the adjustment to life in America, it was definitely sticking to your own people and sticking to our family who had immigrated specifically from Kashmir. And of course, that came from the idea of helping out your community and things like that. People were very pro, trying to help each other get jobs and help each other get houses and taking care of their kids and stuff like that. So there wasn't much opportunity for this kind of socializing with, people outside of our immediate circle who we were actively helping to get back on their feet and things like that. But once the years went by and, the wave of immigrating families kind of slowed a little bit, and people started, getting better in their careers and their kids were growing up and things like that, it opened up the door for them to see what other people were out there. And we definitely connected a lot with the Pakistani community in our area. Not as much the Indian community. I can't speak on why that is. There's definitely maybe some political motivation, maybe just accessibility issues where there aren't that many in the area. I'm not sure. But the Pakistani community, definitely, we ended up connecting with a lot, especially because most of them do share the Islamic faith that we have. We, run into them at the mosque all the time. And if there's ever any, celebrations, of religious nature, maybe during Ramadan or for Eid or something like that, then it's an occasion for everyone to get together and meet again. So that's been really nice that we've expanded our social circle to that.
Okay. No, I mean, I just wanted to kind of, realize what was happening and see what that is. So one of the other big themes in your blogs is Wi-Fi.
Yes, that is true.
What is it's like this love hate relationship you have with the Wi-Fi in India, which is terrible. But how was it, in your experience and what was happening?
Yeah, so a lot of times what happens when the Indian ruling government decides that the people of Kashmir, for whatever reason, need to be under either house arrest or have a curfew instilled, or some major revolt or something happens and they kind of need to shut down the
connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. The connectivity of people trying to communicate, to get together, to revolt somewhere, or anything like that. They end up shutting down the Wi-Fi connectivity. And there's several different things that happen during these, house arrests and shutdowns and things like that. They can cut off all forms of communication, like cable, Wi-Fi, telephones, things like that. But then sometimes it's just Wi-Fi, is shut down. And the thing that was so unique about the whole experience to me is that they were completely random shutdowns. I had figured, from hearing back in America, I had figured it was very much cause and effect, like some big, political revolt happens or some
like an unrest.
Exactly, yeah. And as a result of that, they shut down Wi-Fi. But when I was there, it was very much just completely random. It would be just one day I would wake up and the Wi-Fi was shut off. Or like you go through your whole day and, you go around, run your errands, things like that. And then you come home and suddenly the Wi-Fi is shut off. And I mean, the people there have adapted to it, obviously, but for someone like me coming from America, obviously, where, most people do have a smartphone and they do have, cellular data, or we have, regular Wi-Fi at any coffee shop or home or anything. It's very easy to just pull out your phone and, look something up really quickly or send a quick message or something. It was kind of a big, I don't want to say a big lifestyle change because I don't want to make it seem like my whole life is revolving around smartphones and internet. But I mean, it is kind of, you're constantly on your phone. Yeah, exactly. The convenience is shut out of it. And, I had to actively start to do other things with my time when Wi-Fi was
How
shut
do
off.
your parents, or actually your grandparents who still live there, what are their reactions? I mean, they've been living with it, right?
Yeah, it's mostly, I don't want to say passive at this point, but it's just routine, I guess now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like another day in the life. They have again been living there for so long. They've seen all the ups and downs of the revolt and all the punishments and things that have come. So at this point, a small Wi-Fi shutdown, I think, doesn't affect them anymore. It definitely could be a lot worse. So, and especially because they are a little bit older, they aren't as reliant on technology, I guess, as more
Mm-hmm.
of the younger generations are. So for them, it's just like if Wi-Fi is shut down, then they watch TV. If TV is shut down, then they, call their friends. If the phones are shut down, then they, read the newspaper for, like I mentioned, I think in my blog too, like the third time that day. If they had nothing else to do, they would just read and reread newspapers or books or things they had lying around, or, they would cook, or, if power was shut off, then they would just take a nap, or they would just, do their daily prayers and things like that. They just, very seamlessly adjusted their lifestyle to whatever random changes would happen on that day. And it is admirable, definitely, that they, are able to do it with, such efficiency. They have like this, list of things ready to go depending on what is happening in the area at that time. But I mean, it is also kind of sad that that's what their lifestyle's been
Right.
forced to do.
Yeah, and it's honestly, and from my perspective in hearing this, it's super interesting, especially like out of what we take as as something. I don't.
It's just
Sorry.
so. No, I was just gonna say it's so omnipotent Wi-Fi. It's like everywhere. It's something that we
Right,
definitely take for
right,
granted.
right. And then if it leaves, and well, I'm interested like how things that we take for granted, Kashmiris, your family and your parents, and how they, when that is taken from them, hopefully they do something productive with it. And one of the things that you were talking about is reading, right?
Yeah.
And something that features in your blog, but also is a very very famous bookstore, is the Gulshan bookstore, and you walked with it with your dad, and I guess that's been a big part of your dad's upbringing too.
Yeah, definitely. I always joke with my parents that whenever we try to, like pick apart my genes and figure out which parent it came from, my mom loves to read, but she always complains that she doesn't have the patience for it. So she's always hated, sitting down with these thick books and reading them. And my dad is the complete opposite. He actively seeks out these, very history dense and, very thick books because he loves to read. I took one class while I was at NYU that was a class devoted to Islamic history and Islamic societies. And the textbook that I ended up getting for that class, I ended up gifting to him. And he actually, read it quite fast and was actually interested in it. So he definitely is someone who loves reading and has grown up around reading. And he passed that down to me. And I am an avid reader as well. So whenever we do go to Kashmir, we have our little bonding where we do
Did
go to this.
did
Oh, go
this
ahead.
reading? Yeah, did this reading start from Kashmir, or where?
I wish I knew because it is such a profound hobby, I guess, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that it is something, like you said, is a productive way to pass time if ever there is conflict and shutdown that happens in Kashmir. So I would love to discuss with my dad and find out if it was a hobby that, spurred from genuine interest or if it was something that spurred from necessity that, he had to
A bit
have
of
something
both.
to. Yeah, I mean, definitely a bit of both. It is, I like to think that part of the reason why Gulshan Bookstore is still very popular is that a lot of the Kashmiri people do actively read. And maybe it is, a combination of both, that they're just a, whole community of people that does love reading, and also that it's one of the only resources they have left that they can keep themselves entertained with in
That'll
these,
stay. Yeah,
trying times.
yeah,
Yeah.
and will stay. No, and the importance of reading, and importance of reading history. For example, you talked about in the book that you found, or in your blog, that you found that a great great grandfather, an ancestor of yours, had written a book about
Yeah.
Persian, and been translated in Urdu. That's crazy.
I know that's crazy because I mean, I feel like it really validates our family history of loving to read that we have like a, very ancient published author as a great-great-grandfather.
And you found that for the first time in Gulshan?
Yeah, I mean, definitely my dad probably knew about it way
Mm.
ahead of time, but he probably figured that, when he heard that it was a published book out there, he wanted to buy the, authentic copy from Gulshan bookstore when we went to Kashmir. So
Which is crazy that they have these books. I mean, it's like a
I
lineage that's coming
know,
down.
I know, seriously. And it's really funny too, because like the Kashmiri people, they come from ancient Persia and immigrated a little further south, and that's why we often get confused for Persian, because we do have a lot of the similar ancestry to them. So my great grandfather, I don't know how many greats, published this book
Uh-huh.
about like ancient Persian history and Kashmiri history, and it's so crazy to think that we can like very physically trace these origins of the Kashmiri people through these books and the work of people who actually were part of that immigration and came and originally settled to this Kashmiri area. And it was really cool. It was, yeah, like you mentioned, published in Urdu, and my dad found the authentic copy written, in Urdu with the, name at the top, published by, a Dedmari, and it was very exciting.
So one of the other things that I noticed was your typical tourist pictures. Um, the whole posing, the outfits, which you look
Yeah.
wonderful in, by the way.
Thank you.
But it's kind of interesting, and also this sort of the artwork that's going on. You want to talk a little
Yeah,
bit about that?
of course, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why Kashmir is, so famous and also so prized by all these, different countries that want to take control over it is, well, of course, like it's, strategic location, and it has a lot of running water, and obviously it's just a generally beautiful place. So that's the
Right.
few main reasons that like India, Pakistan both want it, but
And
also
China.
and China. Can't forget about that 10% of China.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the craftsmanship that is so popular in Kashmir. There are extremely skilled craftsmen in
Still?
Kashmir. Yes, still to this day. There's a bunch of, I know what they're famous for a lot of different things. One thing in particular is their paper mache work. If you go to like any shopping district in Kashmir, there's bound to be one shop that is devoted to strictly selling paper mache works, and they have anything from keychains to little model houseboats to jewelry boxes to pen holders, things like that. These big, the Kashmiri version of a factory, it's not like, chugging machines and, clocking in and out kind of thing. It's just this big expanse of people who do this paper mache work. They do the most beautiful, intricate painting in a very traditional Kashmiri style. And because it's something that's so... I'm struggling to find the right word. It's just everywhere in Kashmir. They tend to be like pretty fairly priced in Kashmir, and then when you bring them over to America, they're of course like upsold, and people are clamoring to get these beautiful traditional Kashmiri handicrafts. They're also known for like really intricate woodworking that they do. And of course, their clothing that's really famously known for, they have Kashmiri Pashmina shawls that every single time we go to Kashmir, you have relatives and family friends and things asking us to, buy specific colors and specific embroidery works and specific patterns back from them, because it's something that people love so much and that they really treasure to have.
I want to wrap things up, and as an outsider, Kashmir to me is a lot of things, but generally it's very geared towards it being a political, socio-economic, all these stereotypical characteristics that one would assume. I want to ask, what is your Kashmir? What do you think Kashmir is for you? And secondly, what is Kashmir to your family?
It is the most military occupied territory in the world right now. And the statistic, I think, is approximately one Indian Army officer per every 5 citizens in the whole Jammu and Kashmir territory. And when I heard that, it was so shocking to me, because Kashmir, I mean, it is, well known among the Indian and Pakistani community that it is an area that's a huge conflict zone, and there's, like you said, a lot of political strife happening there. But, to the rest of the world, it's largely unknown. And it's so shocking to me because it is so heavily military occupied, and there are so many horrible human rights violations happening there. So honestly, my Kashmir, what it was, from my own understanding and my own attempts to reach out and find out about, why this place was so talked about, why there were so many horrible things happening there, was a pretty bleak picture of these, horrible attacks put upon the Kashmiri people and the rights stripped from them and the punishments put upon them. And I was lucky enough that because Kashmir, again, is something that's very founded in community, I had a whole community of fellow Kashmiris to educate me about some of the more optimistic and some of the more profound and happier things that do make up Kashmir. Because if I had just because I was raised in America, I only had what was, besides my trips to Kashmir myself, only the things that I could look up myself were really what was accessible to me. And of course, the only things that are published online about Kashmir are these horrible things that make you very angry. And so I was lucky I had this whole community of people who told me about the things that existed in Kashmir, prior to, and maybe still do exist, their immigration to America. And they told me about the schools they grew up in and the childhoods they had, and the traditional cultural things that they took a part of. And, above all, the really strong community that they had in Kashmir. And I guess they would share this community and the faith that they have in this community and their fighting spirit and their, pure want for independence is what still gives them hope to this day that, one day the condition in Kashmir will be better. One day the people will be happy and not full of stress and depression about their environment. And
you think,
again, go ahead.
You think that Kashmir now for you and your family is really about the Kashmiri people rather than, again, we started this show off, but about the community, about the people that have been affected, that are being affected right now, some that have moved on, some that haven't been able to move on. And we tend to forget, I'm talking about, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the outsiders tend to forget that this live conflict has an effect, not just on how much territory that we're able to secede, but how many people we're able to affect by our actions, and we're all guilty of that. But one of the most fascinating things and one of the most brilliant things is that even though there has been such an effect, and even though there's a lot of somewhat contempt, not just from you, but from a lot of people, and some righteously, there are these very beautiful aspects and strains that have come out of this discontent in that area. And it was amazing to not just talk to you and to realize all these things, but to read your blog and to see that the Kashmiri people have found a way through their difficulties, through their circumstances. And this might seem a little bit of a novelty, but it's fascinating to just witness that as an outsider. And
thank you so much. I mean, you just put it so nicely. You wrapped it up so well. It is, I really do appreciate you taking the time to really focus on exactly that aspect, that in every conflict zone, every small little pocket of the world, no matter what's going on, there is such a unique and diverse, group of people that are living that life and living through these traumas and things that are happening. And it's really nice that Kashmir can be known as something other than this place that's full of political strife, but it can be known for some of the more beautiful things that it has, like these amazing natural resources and the beautiful handicrafts, and above all, just the beautiful people that have such an amazing connection with one another.
No, I mean, you probably noticed this, and we'll wrap this up, but one thing that just got me interested is I've noticed at NYU and my time at Oxford and et cetera, everyone is gung-ho about, obviously, if there is a political strife in some place of the world, to obviously be an activist about it, to get out there, to talk about it, and kind of like fight the fight that's needed. But at the same time, they are also complicit in basically us forgetting not just an identity, but these crafts and these trades and these specialties that we tend to just look past over and just focus on the negative and the injustice, which is needed. I'm not saying it's not. It's just,
No, of course, yeah.
Look at your family. Look at the people around you.
I know
Beautiful.
it's a really interesting take. I mean, I agree with that. That of course the political situation is very important. There's a reason it's one of the most talked about aspects of Kashmir and of any conflict zone. But you always should think about informing yourself of the very humanizing aspects, because I think that brings you even closer to the argument about justice and fairness of the area, is if you educate yourself about the value of the area beyond just monetary and political value, more about the people themselves and the skills they have and the qualities that they bring to the area, because a territory is nothing without its people and what they bring to it.
Of course. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me. And
yeah, thank you.
I hope that you keep going back and keep writing. And just a reminder to all the listeners, you can read the blog on kashmir2017blog.wordpress.com. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Sehar.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation that we had today. We're bound to make mistakes, but we'll only learn and get better from here. Now, if you want to take part in Swadeshi Videshi, any questions, suggestions, or just want to tell me how much you love Swadeshi Videshi, you can contact me on Twitter at Sudhanshu Kaushik. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Swadeshi Videshi. We hope you learned a little bit more, not just about India, but Indians. And we'll be back next week with another episode in hopes of bringing Indians closer to India.